Welcome to WBC Faster Together, the LinkedIn Live series of Women Business Collaborative. I'm Gwen Young, Chief Executive Officer of WBC. And today we are joined by Anna Dutra, the CEO of Mandala Global Advisors and a board member from WBC, and Dr. Lisette Garcia, the Chief Research Officer at HACR, one of WBC's valued partner organizations. WBC is an unprecedented alliance of over 83 women business organizations and hundreds of business leaders building a movement to achieve equal position, pay, and power for all women in business. Through collaboration, advocacy, action, and accountability, we are mobilizing thousands to create momentum and accelerate the pace of change. We live our commitment to DEI, and members of our leadership, our staff, board of directors, and advisory council include more than 34% people of color. And each and every one of our action initiatives has DEI goals for 2025 and 2030. So please check the chat for our 9 action initiatives through which we aim to accelerate change and join our movement at wbcollaborative.org. Each week in this series, we offer different ways to advocate change and accelerate impact by presenting data research and best practices, by lifting up the power of women voices for change, and by showing the importance of cross-generational collaboration and the allyship of men in the movement. So let's start today. According to a recent report from Latino Donor Collaborative, the total economic output of U.S. Latinos reached $3.2 trillion in 2021, and U.S. Latino buying power and economic output grew by more than 14%, despite the pandemic's disproportionate impact on Latino communities. And it's critical to recognize the important role this community plays in the economic health and success of the United States. And so I'm so delighted to be joined by Anna and Lisette to share deeper insights on the contributions of the Hispanic Latino community and to talk about the HACR Corporate Inclusion Index. So Anna and Lisette, thank you for joining us.
Our pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. Wonderful to be here with you, Gwen.
So the data I shared, let's set the stage a little bit. The data I shared is from 2021 and is this most recent available data. What do you guys, can you tell us a little bit more about this data? Give us some context and how are we seeing the role this community, the Latino community, plays in contributing to evolve as we head into 2024?
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and jump in here, Anna, and share a few thoughts, and then please feel free to chime in and expand on what I'm saying. So that 3.2 trillion figure, Gwen, makes the U.S. Latino community the world's 5th largest economy when you look at us relative to other countries, right? And in the time period between 2011 and 2021, the data that you have that's most recently available, we were the 3rd fastest growing economy behind that of China and India. So when you think about that and you think about the way that companies think about their strategy for attracting global markets and the work that they're doing, right? We are one of the largest non-global US based, right, markets in the world, right? And when you couple that with the growing Hispanic population in the United States, right? We're one of the fastest growing demographics here in the United States. We make up currently 18% of the labor force, but are expected to increase to upwards of, 20, 25, 30% of the labor force in the next few years. That's a huge proportion of who's working at all of these companies, right? And who is coming behind to fill those leadership roles and to really help those companies continue to grow, right? So I think, at HACR, the Hispanic Association on Corporate Responsibility, we're really focused on helping companies understand how they can target and leverage that population today to be successful continuing into the future.
And just to add to what Lisette said, if you think about this 3.2 trillion, that is just in direct consumption. We're not even adding to that the influence that Latinos have in other types of purchases that make up the economy as well. And then the other thing that I always point out to is, in particular, if you look at direct-to-consumer industries, food and beverage, CPG, Latinas are making the decisions at home. So you can just not afford to understand how we think, right? And I think that goes from the entire employee population to management, senior executive, C-suite, and the boardroom as well.
Well, and that's why I want to switch. It's that, like you said, it's that power, the direct power, the indirect power, the consumer, the driver of the economies. I want to talk a little bit, Lisette, about the corporate inclusion index and how, what are those findings telling you? Because we're transferring into like leadership in the workforce, leadership in the workplace, leadership on board of directors. But let's talk a little bit about that corporate inclusion index and what is that telling us?
Yeah. So the CII, as we call it, sort of in shorthand, it looks at a lot of different elements within corporations and the way that they're connecting with the Hispanic community. We look at procurement numbers, we look at governance numbers, we look at the way companies have chosen to engage philanthropically with the growing Hispanic community in the United States. And of course, we look at employment numbers, right? And so, amongst the companies that participated in the survey this year, and we had about 100 companies participate in the survey this year, the average, I'd say, proportion there is about 15% of the employee population was Hispanic. But when we took a deeper dive and looked at that number, which, is a little bit lower than that 18% of total labor force that we see sort of generally speaking in the United States. But when we look at that number a little bit more closely and look at the kinds of positions that Hispanics are holding within companies, nearly 75% of the total Hispanic employee workforce within those participating companies was in non-exempt positions, right? And those non-exempt positions are ones that, they don't always have access to the same benefits. They can be more precarious in nature, right? They're the ones that often are subject to layoff and, things like closures. They're also positions that generally are hourly versus salary. They don't offer the same opportunities for professional development and certainly often don't have that same path to leadership positions. And I think we see a direct correlation between that sort of fact of this over concentration of Hispanics in non-exempt positions and then lower proportions of Hispanics that are in executive positions. So when we looked at C-suite positions, right, specifically say direct reports of the CEO, less than 5% of those positions were held by Hispanics in the companies that were participating in the survey, right? So you think about this large growing population that, as Anna said, is sort of, part of who you have to think about when you're making decisions, right? You have to think about, their needs and preferences. And that's not represented around the table where those decisions are being made. And so that really is a challenge. And that's one that we work quite closely with companies to help them think about what they could be doing differently there.
And Anna, I want to bring you in because you've worked with the variety of companies, even at the board level and with the companies. And what are you seeing with their approach to understanding this community, the talent that's there, and the importance of the leadership?
So over the last 20 years, I think we're doing better on inclusion, right? So there is intentional action around DE&I and ERGs and all that. I have the honor of chairing the initiative around women on boards for Women Business Collaborative. And one thing that we noticed at first was that we were getting more women on boards, but not necessarily Latinas. And so we started to push for more Latinas, women of color, and we're seeing the numbers improving as well. I also have the honor of serving on the board of the Latino Corporate Directors Association, where we look at Latinos on boards as a whole, and we are making progress slowly but surely. But here are the two caveats on that. Number one is we're making progress on positions, but not yet on compensation parity. So there is still a huge discrepancy between how much a Latino or a Latina in the same position as a person who's not a person of color, in particular a man, makes. And I always say that, listen, people are not going to leave companies and to leave jobs because of money only, but they will leave if they don't feel that they're being treated fairly. So that's one of them. The other thing that's really interesting, where I think we're we're walking a little bit backwards. There was a McKinsey study that was published about 6 months ago that was looking at the increase of Latinas as entrepreneurs in the U.S. economy. And this sounds great and very encouraging. But the problem was in the root causes. Why were Latinas leaving corporations, leaving corporate America to go set up their own businesses? And that's because they did not have the feeling that their voices were heard. They did not feel that they had the proper and equal career opportunities, sense of influence. And therefore, at some point, they said, you know what the heck? If I am not valued here, I'm going to leave and start my own business. So on one hand, that's great, right? Because that ignites this whole small business segment and the representation of Latinas in it. But on the other hand, if you look at the reasons behind why that's happening, it's actually very saddening. So the last thing I will say is that as we started to work on putting more women and more Latinos on boards, one thing that we realized after 2-3 years of effort was that we were recycling the same group of people, right? So you asked what it is in the pipeline. Is it building the pipeline? Is it empowering the pipeline and not letting great talent drop out in the middle of the process? So we can go more into that, but I'll pass it.
No, but I think that brings us to our, like, I want a little dig a little deeper what like companies actually can do, right? Because the push for the board is something we see at Women Business Collaborative and in the kind of work that we do with the board groups and groups like Latino Corporate Directors and 50-50 Women on Boards. What are we doing in kind of that retention and promotion space that can really help, also recruitment? Like, where can we make that shift either to the sort of, exempt versus non-exempt space, but the senior leadership positions where you can start making some other talent decisions? Or is there any innovations you see companies are doing?
I think that the companies that are doing better are the ones that are, number one, incredibly intentional about moving Latinas up and training them, and understand that there is a cultural element to that too, which is in the Latino culture. And I don't want to generalize too much, but there is an expectation that, so you talk about the sandwich generation, right? In the Latino culture, multiply that by 10, because women are expected to take care of their elderly, to pay more attention to the children. And so the whole conversation about work-life balance becomes even more extreme, right? Many times children don't leave home until they get married. So understanding this segment and not doing like the peanut butter approach, which is we're going to do the same incentives or the same benefits or take the same approach to everybody, is going to be key. And then creating networks of support, because this we started with diversity, and then we talked about inclusion, and then we talked about equity, and I think that belonging is probably the most important aspect of retention and development and promotion. Lisette, is that what you're seeing at HACR as well?
Yeah, I'm going to really pick up on this word you used earlier, Anna, and that's intentional and intentionality, just sort of generally speaking. I think, the companies that we're seeing be more successful in some of their Hispanic inclusion efforts are the ones that are really being intentional about those efforts. They not only have them, but they have goals, they have metrics to evaluate the success of the different initiatives that they are doing. And those things go a really long way in creating a culture of accountability and in impacting this work, right? So that intentionality coupled with goals and metrics is really important. And then I think it's also important to, sort of think outside the box, right? Like, so I'll use it for example here, sponsorship, right? Like that is something that has existed forever, right? And it was previously something that happened sort of oftentimes without you knowing. It wasn't something that was formalized. But I think when companies are intentional in their desire to advance Hispanic and Hispanic women and any other underrepresented groups, something like an intentional formal sponsorship program really goes a long way to breaking down those barriers and providing that support that Anna was just talking about, right? Like we need to have people who are going to champion us when we don't know about it, but also when we know about it and in the right conversations in order to really help us move through that pipeline. And, when we look at that pipeline, we're looking, direct reports 2, 3 levels from the CEO, and our numbers are still really small in all of those levels, right? And so it's about really thinking about what can companies do with intentionality to increase those numbers and to really ensure that the next generation of leadership for their companies includes the Hispanic population.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I love that because I was in another conversation where it was like sort of decide and document, right? It's the intentionality, it's the metrics and the benchmarks, it's share them, it's, really write it down and show it. Show it in everything you do, right? Throughout the company, from how you measure your talent to how you're engaging in your communities, right? To Anna's point about these are your consumers, these are the people that you're working with, right?
Yeah. And Gwen, I would add one thing to that too. It's that, it is, not something that works when it's like an aside. It has to really be woven into the values of the organization for it to be successful. If it's sort of something that happens aside, it's a check the box kind of thing. We all know that that doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
It has to really be woven into the fabric of an organization in order for those initiatives to be successful.
Absolutely. Well, that's as we come up on the time, I want to give us time, like, what's the one thing? What's the call to action? What's the one thing, Lisette? You mentioned thinking out of the box, right? And I know, Anne, I know where you sit with several companies. Like, what's the one thing they can do, right, to make that intention real, right? Because I think we hear a lot about intentionality, especially in the DEI space broadly. But what's that call to action we can do for your company or organization to really help us move the needle and drive impact?
So I would say two things. Number one is when companies push those types of initiatives and efforts to HR only, that's a recipe for disaster. So make line management, P&L leaders accountable for it and include it in their objectives. The second point, and that's something that these days I worry about quite a bit, is as soon as you see uncertainty in the economy, as soon as you see more attention being paid to short-term results, that's when we see the numbers going down for us because you take your eye off the ball. So you said the call for action. My call for action is do not take the eye off the ball. Operate in the short term and in the long term. So be ambidextrous as leaders. And I will also say that regardless on what level you are, what position you serve, and do your part. Do your part, because if each and every one of us does our little bit, right? Even sometimes it is just like got a call for a board position, got a call for a potential job, not interested, conflicted, but give the names of 3 Latinos that could fulfill that role, because otherwise what we're doing is enabling the I wish I could have found a good Latino CFO, but I can't find it, right?
Yeah.
And I would add, Gwen, I'm a researcher, so I'm going to give the plug here for, data-driven evidence, to really help companies understand where the opportunities are and where there's, the chance for growth and improvement. And the other thing that I would say is partnership, right? Like we don't expect companies to be able to do this alone. And that's why organizations like HACR and WBC exist, right? Like we want to be your partners in this work. And there's nothing wrong with seeking out the partners that make sense to help you think about how you can really be successful in Hispanic inclusion.
It's really not. I love that because it ends with sort of why we're all here, right? Working in that partner in that collaborative way to really, I always say, Lisette, know the data, but use it, use it to make a decision, right? Act on the data, right? So that you can go, how is this, whether it's the pay equity data, the 47 cents on the dollar, right? Whether it's the exempt, non-exempt, where people are, but let's use that to help us understand what we can do, including the $3.2 trillion. So thank you both, Anna and Lisette. It's all we have time for today. And I'm so glad to be with you today, but I'm so glad that we continue to work on this together through the work of the WBC, the work of HACR, as we move forward and trying to understand what companies can do, what systems, what they can do after intentionality. So we invite the audience to go to wbcollaborative.org to learn more about initiatives to increase women in the C-suite, from the CEO and the boardroom, and to address the underrepresentation in industries like technology, women-owned business, and women and capital investors, and to advance this pipeline of women leaders that's going to bring gender, pay parity, equity, diversity, and inclusion to the business landscape. So join us weekly to keep up to date on our progress. Thank you both for your time today, and we look forward to seeing everybody next Thursday. Have a wonderful Thursday, and let's